Hello guys, and welcome to Chapter 8 of the Production Pipeline series with me, Eldarin from Logis Lumiere. Today we're going to be going into ZBrush and Maya, and we're going to be using Maya's UV features and ZBrush's sculpting capabilities to go ahead and make this landscape look a little bit more detailed. And in thus doing, we'll be able to bring all that stuff back into Cinema. We'll be able to use C4D to A's displacement functionality to be able to go ahead and add some nice detail to this without actually increasing our Arnold render times too much. So let's get going here. So we have this landscape here, which I'm going to go ahead and rename to just landscape. And what I've done between lessons here is I've deleted one side of the landscape, and I'm basically going to use this landscape twice. I'm going to use a clone or an instance of it to basically have two sides of this road here. I've also moved the lantern a little bit off of the landscape so it looks a little bit better. It's not embedded into the ground so much. Alright, and so what we're going to do is we're going to hit Go Z, and I've kind of been messing around, so it's telling me that there's already an object called landscape in ZBrush. It's just going to go ahead and rename this for me, which is fine. Go ahead and let it do that. And it's going to open up ZBrush 4R7, which is the last version, the last release of version 4 of ZBrush. And in this version, I believe they included the Z modeler, which is really great for you classic modeling types. Allows you to get some really nice hard surface modeling. I'm not sure any of the other features that they added, but I know they added a lot of interesting stuff that's really got a lot of the modeler types extremely happy. But anyway, we're just going to go ahead and draw our landscape onto the scene and then immediately go into edit mode, and that'll put us in 3D mode. You can follow my ZBrush tutorial that I've done on my channel previously for some of the navigation tips and all that kind of good stuff. But what we're going to do in here is we're just going to add just a little bit of extra detail to this model to just show off what Arnold is capable of as far as actually capturing all this detail. So what we can do is we can go into the surface tool set here, and we can go into noise. And what we can do is we can edit the noise, and you're seeing immediately in your viewport here that by turning on the surface noise there, you're getting a lot of high frequency detail into your mesh. This is all a ZBrush visualization of that noise. What we want to do is we want to go ahead and actually subdivide our mesh a little bit, and it's actually showing that I have my original mesh still here that I've worked on before. Let me go ahead and delete all the higher subdivs, so we're left with just the low resolution subdiv here. And what we want to do first is we want to go ahead and actually divide this to be able to allow ourselves to have some high resolution detail. Now, a 4K texture has about 16 million pixels in it, give or take. And if you want to polypaint this in ZBrush and get the same level of pixel detail for polygon detail, you're probably going to want to get your mesh up to around that level in order to get that actual detail into the actual mesh if you're going to be doing spotlight here. Speaking on this, if we go back into Cinema here, we want to take into consideration, if we go ahead and display our polygon sizes, we want to take into consideration our resolution of our scene, so this white kind of sort of area here, and what kind of sort of textures we're going to be working with. So and this kind of gets into the Hollywood workflow. They typically work with a lot of 8K textures, and oftentimes they'll have like the forearms and then the arms and the hands and then the face, and all this stuff separated into multiple tiles. I've seen a workflow with one guy where he had like damn near 200 patches on a single character, or 200 4K or 2K textures on a single character, multiple parts of the character cut up. And this is because if you look at this resolution here, we're at 1280 and we've got this landscape and we're getting about maybe this close in our shot. Perhaps she's going to be walking by and maybe we're going to be zooming in on her, and you know, the viewer is going to be looking at the background, they're going to be looking at her, and she's taking up maybe a fifth of the space right now, but if we got in close on her face, she'd be taking up even more of that resolution. And if we look at the polygons on her face and you know what each one takes, each one of these polygons is probably taking, you know, maybe about 10 pixels of the screen real estate each. Let's see, the landscape itself has a lot bigger polygons and they're taking up let's see, about a tenth of the space. So if we bring out our handy dandy calculator here, we go ahead with 1280 and then we divide that by like maybe about 11 or 10 different tiles. You know, each one of these tiles is taking up 166 pixels of space altogether on the screen. Now, depending upon what our resolution is, if our resolution was, you know, we were getting into Disney and Pixar land and our resolution was actually 4K, we were making this for the silver screen, you know, we divide that by 11, you know, each one of these tiles is going to take up about 300 pixels in and of itself of screen real estate, which means, yeah, we would need something like, you know, a 4K or 8K texture perhaps to make sure that if we zoom in pretty tight on this, you know, we're getting all that resolution that we need to get out of this one particular polygon. So that's kind of, you know, why you would use higher resolution textures in a film type of environment. Video games, it's starting to get to that kind of level too now with the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One. You know, we're getting these extremely detailed scenes where, you know, these guys are starting to use 4K textures now, different things. But so what we're going to want to do in Maya when we go into our UV workflow is what we're probably going to want to go ahead and actually break this up into multiple tiles. So if we just select this area of our resolution gate and, you know, zoom out and see what we have here, we'll notice that we have a tile about yay big. So theoretically we will want this one little area to probably have its own 4K or 2K texture. That being said, we're probably going to want to break our landscape into maybe fourths, and then by the same token divide it here into maybe 8. Just for the sake of kind of sort of keeping it a little bit more manageable, we're going to go ahead and actually break it into 6 by 3 here, which will give us 18 tiles. Alright, so that's kind of how you can break it down, and if you do that and you figure out, you know, where your closest shot's going to be, and you break out your tiles that way, you can get a good idea of exactly where you need to break your UVs up. And then the other great thing about this is, you know, once again, Arnold's TX format is a tiled format. So Arnold, if you get in close like this, Arnold will only load the certain part of this 4K texture that it needs to actually render, and it won't actually load the rest of that into memory. And so it'll be incredibly efficient with its use of textures. which is really great. That's the main benefit of the TX format, is its efficiency with memory. So in ZBrush, bearing all of that in mind, what we can do is we can continue detailing out our landscape here. So we can come into our surface, go ahead and add some noise, go ahead and edit it. Let's also go ahead and click OK on the noise real quick, and just go ahead and save, just in case something untoward happens to our scene. We'll call this 00, and we'll go ahead and save it in Testus folder here. Let's see, test, it's going to be under my documents, test 2, save it under Arnold landscape, under ZBrush, and we'll give it an iteration of 00 here, just to start out. And then we can go back and edit the noise, and we come in and go ahead and zoom in, tumble. Let's see what we're working with our noise here. There we go, that's a little bit better. It's giving me a good viewport. And I'm liking the low frequency or the high frequency noise here. Let's go to our noise plugins. Let's say maybe add a erosion perhaps. It'll probably give us a really good look here. Up the magnitude a little bit. Maybe the level of detail. Perhaps do something with the scale. We don't want too much of it, but don't want too little either. Yeah, maybe it's looking pretty good in the Y. Let's see if the Z does anything for us. Yeah, kind of digging that. Play around with the magnitude just a little bit more. See what we get out of that. Okay, so that gives us quite a bit of high frequency detail there to work with. Let's click OK, and let's go ahead and apply that to the mesh. And so that's going to bake down the noise into our mesh. And based on our polygon count, we may or may not be able to get all of that noise, potentially. But yeah, ZBrush is thinking. And okay, it's done. So it looks slightly different, perhaps, than what we had in the noise manager, and that's only because the resolution of our mesh may or may not be high enough to actually accept all that high resolution detail. But what we can do here is we can come through and maybe use something like the damn standard brush. So we can hit B, D for the D brushes, and then hit S right here to bring up the standard damn standard brush. And we can come in and maybe we can increase our size a little bit. Perhaps grab the Wacom pin here for some variation. Bring up the Z intensity, and we can just go ahead and start to, paint in some ridge areas here throughout the mesh. Let's see if I increase my draw size even more and get even more of a level of detail out of this. Maybe some branchy lines. Just starting to add some sculpted detail in here. Maybe you want to use BST, the standard brush. Go in and maybe pull some areas up a little bit, perhaps. And just generally kind of sort of add just a little bit of extra sculpted detail to this. Just trying to get a little bit of a different look so that we can see what's going down in Arnold. You know, raise that area up. And maybe we'll call that good. So let's do a save as and save this again. Alright. And so what we can do is go ahead and go back down to our lower subdivision level, and we're going to see that our base mesh changed. So we can go ahead and go Z that back into Cinema and let that be our new base mesh. So it's going to have some of the changes that were made in ZBrush applied to it a little bit, and that'll be great. Back here in ZBrush, we can go ahead and actually use this little R button here in our tool palette to go ahead and change the registered app over to Maya. And that way, when we hit Go Z now, it'll actually send this mesh out into Maya. And I'm using Maya 2015 extension 1 right now. And in Maya 2015, they added a lot of new UV features. They took what I assume was a plugin previously in Maya, the Unfold 3D algorithm, developed by another developer, I think, and they've integrated it into Maya to make the UV process much nicer. Maya creates these incredible UVs for organic characters really nicely. We're going to use that technique combined with some planar mapping to go ahead and actually texture this. So we can bring up our UV editor, or UV texture editor here, and I've already laid out a little bit of a layout here, but what I'm going to do is go through and actually delete all those UVs and start from scratch here. By default, by the by, Cinema basically will lay out a tile in the UV 0 to 1 space with all of the polygons in that single tile. Is kind of sort of what the default UVs come out of Cinema looking like. So we can go into faces mode here, do a control A. That is going to deselect our whole attributes manager, which is not good. Let's go ahead and do a drag instead here, and I'm going to go ahead and create a planar mapped UV, and that's just going to give us kind of sort of the same thing that we got in Cinema actually, as far as our UV textures are concerned. And it's just going to give us some UVs to work with. And what we want to do is we want to come in here with our selection tool, and we want to break this up into multiple tiles. So we wanted to do 18, so what we can do is we've actually got, the grid is a big help to us here. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 grid lines here. So all we have to do is really select an edge, go into edge mode, select an edge that's kind of sort of close to where that line is. And if we control double click or shift double click on an edge rather, we're going to actually select the whole entire edge loop there. So shift double click, select that, come over here, shift double click, select that. Let's do a shift double click like that, and shift double click and select that. And that's going to break our island up like that. And then from the top, what we can do is we can just come in real nicely, maybe move the UV texture editor over here a little bit, get this really tight in the view, and basically split this up into thirds by eye here. And there we go. So we split our landscape up into 18 tiles. And what we'll do in the UV texture editor here is we'll come in, we'll actually cut the UVs along the selected edges. And that's basically going to cut this up, and it's going to give us 18 different shells. So if we come in here into shell mode, we can actually come in here and select each individual shell, like so. And this is really great, because now what we can do is we can go ahead and select the second shell here, and we can go ahead and just move it over one space, and that would put it on UV tile 2 for us. But what we want to do is we want to select the first shell, and we want to go ahead and actually create a planar map for that. And that's just basically going to make this whole entire shell take up the whole 0 to 1 space. And if we turn on new in 2015 here, we turn on our checkered tiles, this is actually going to show us a hardware UV shader here. Where it's going to show us, you know, what our UVs look like, what our distortion looks like here, and everything. So this is really great for quickly checking your UVs and seeing what they look like. We're also going to go ahead and set our project. So looks like it's already set to Arnold Landscape. So behind the scenes, what I had done was I actually went into the project window, went ahead and created a new project, named it Maya, and I stored it under Arnold Landscape. And that gave me a full Maya project with all these folders, so Maya would know where to save different things when it does dynamics and stuff like that. So we can go ahead and save this scene, and we're probably going to have a scene here already. Once Maya kind of sort of loads up my directory view here. Landscape UVs, we can go ahead and save over that and overwrite it. Alright. So what we can do is we can hold Control and convert this face selection into UVs. And so now we have the UVs, and what we can do is we can do an unfold, and we can let the unfold algorithm just kind of sort of give us a somewhat nicer UV layout. For that, just click it a couple of times, let it kind of sort of give us a nice look, and then we can go ahead and actually scale this UV down ever so slightly. Let's hit Control Z. Let's go ahead and scale these UVs down ever so slightly, so that we just make sure that they're completely in the UV 0 to 1 space, or their tile space. Make sure that they're just not going over their borders, where we don't get any weird kind of sort of UV artifacts when we actually texture this stuff or create displacement maps out of it. Alright, and then we can right click, go into shell mode again, and we can click on them, we can select another shell. We can go ahead and tear this off, and we can start doing this pretty fast. We can planar map that shell, we can go ahead and move it over to the next UV space using these little nice arrows here. We can go ahead and Control, click, and then convert that to UVs. Do an unfold really quickly to get a better distribution there. Do a scale. And the keyboard shortcuts for scale, translation, and rotation are W, E, and R respectively. W for translate, E for rotate, and R for scale here in Maya. So that's just a quick way to kind of sort of move through your tools really fast. Switch back to shells. Come over here. We've already got this torn off, so we can just planar map real quick here. Hold Control, convert that to UVs. Go ahead and unfold that a couple of times. Hit R to go into scale. Scale that down. And we just basically want to go through this process for all of our tiles until we have them all laid out in this this UV space. Now, once again, if you ever plan on painting in Mari, and just to be on the safe side for other programs. Remember that Mari doesn't like your UVs to go past 10. So what will happen on the 11th tile is you're going to go ahead and move it up 1 in the V space, and then you're going to start laying out all the tiles across here. So I'll meet you guys back on the other side when I've completed this. Alrighty guys, and so we're back and it's all done. And you can see how the hardware UV texture editor is giving us a really nice numerical representation of where each of our tiles are. Over here, to go kind of quicker, what I did was I actually was just selecting shells, moving them over into place, and then once I got the majority of them, once I got all of them kind of sort of done, I actually ran an unfold UVs on all of them, and it actually kept them all in their same location and kind of sort of relaxed their UVs and got a much better distribution of the polygons for me, which is really great. And then I just went one by one through and just finished off scaling them so that they lied inside their own UV tiles. Just make sure none of them are going over the line here. This guy almost seemed like he was doing, but you zoom in a little bit closer and you see that he's not. Alright, so with all of that done and with a nice UV layout set up, we can go ahead and send this back into ZBrush. And that's going to update our UVs behind the scenes and give us a nice layout to work with for our normals and our displacement. Now, there are 2 different ways you can go ahead and get those UVs back into Cinema 4D. You could go ahead and change your registered app back to Cinema 4D. Go ahead and go Z this back into Cinema. What will happen if you do that is the UVs will get kind of sort of reversed and flipped a little bit. And you'll have to go Z back into ZBrush to make sure that ZBrush has the flipped UVs as well. It's just kind of sort of a weird thing about Go Z to Cinema 4D and UVs for some particular reason. Especially if you've done UVs in Maya and then you send them back into Cinema and you come back into ZBrush, you're going to see that your UVs are going to be kind of sort of flipped and odd. So you could get proper UVs directly out of Maya by using the FBX Export. So all we need to do is come in and just export the selection. And let that load up our FBX exporter real quick. And yeah, we're going to save it as landscape_uv.fbx. And then we can come into Cinema. We can go ahead and merge in that file. So landscape_uv.fbx. Click OK. Choose the default take. And click OK. And we're going to see that our landscape is actually going to come in here extremely tiny. And that's because between ZBrush and Maya, the scale got kind of sort of off a little bit. But it's okay. We don't even need the landscape at all. The only thing we really need is just the UVs. So we can delete the UVs off of our current landscape. And we can go ahead and add the UVs from Maya. And then delete the Maya landscape. And so if we were to go into BPUV edit, we'll see that our UVs from Maya and our UVs in Cinema now match. And the reason why this works is because they are technically the same object. So here in ZBrush now, what we can do is we can actually export out, use the multi-map exporter to go ahead and export out all 18 of these tiles. So we can come into our Z plugins here and come to our multi-map exporter. And what we can do here, and have I Go Z'd from Maya already? I believe I have. So let's go ahead and save this actually as an iteration, and we'll call this 01 now. And you could probably call it like _UVs, I guess, if you wanted to be more detailed about what version of this model is. But what we can do is with the multi-map exporter, we can go ahead and highlight displacement and normals. We can go ahead and pick our map size if we want. We can actually bring this up to 8K actually manually. If you want to get 8K maps out of ZBrush, that's how you can do it. We're going to go with 2K for now, keep things nice and lean, keep Arnold pumping out our images pretty fast. Under our export options, under file names, what we can do is, these aren't the default file names, I've changed these, but if you were to click on these, you can come in and you can change the name so it matches our suffix scheme, where we use underscore displacement for color, and we use underscore diff for color, and underscore displace for displacement, and different things like that. And so ZBrush is not letting me go ahead and change my name here. Okay, there we go. I found that ZBrush doesn't really like the underscore very much. I found that if you're going to have an underscore in your name, you have to go into something like a notepad. Actually type that out, do a Control A, do a Control C, bring that back into ZBrush, Control V, paste that, and then hit enter, and it'll accept the underscore then. It's like the underscore is like a keyboard shortcut for something in ZBrush, and it does that instead of actually accepting it as a name. But so I changed all that stuff there. I also changed it to override existing files, and also because I like the Mari UDIM texture format numbering conventions, I changed that here as well. By default, it uses ZBrush tiling type scheme. So we can change that to UDIM. Now do that. And then what we can do is we can check our displacement settings. So under displacement, we're going to want to pick subdivision level 1. This will create a difference displacement map between whatever the level is that you have selected here and the final level. So you want this to be at level 1, so it uses the base level as the displacement, the difference between 5 and 1, because our subdivision level, our max subdivision level is actually 6 here. So it'll take the difference between 1 and 6 and basically create a displacement map out of that. I've also checked on 32-bit and EXR. 32-bit images will be able to store the full gamut range of height values for displacement map. So that's a pretty important option to select there. You'll lose some of your displacement fidelity if you have this turned off, but you'll have less, your file sizes will be less, so it's a trade-off. I keep it at 32-bit. EXR is probably the best format to use for displacements, and I found that if I have this unchecked, the TIFF format seems to break this multi-map exporter script for me for some particular reason. So I just use the EXRs and it runs just fine. You're going to want your midpoint to be at 0 if you're using a 32-bit map. By default it's at 0.5, and that gives you like a mid-gray displacement map. But there's no reason to have that if you're using a 32-bit image, because of the values that a 32-bit image can hold. You don't need to have that kind of sort of helper here. The DP subpix is a value that is a layover from earlier versions of ZBrush that couldn't handle extremely high polygon counts. This is completely unnecessary, and this should be at 0. And your scale can be at its default, which should be 1. And that's all good for that. Under the normal map, the only thing you probably want to make sure that you check is tangent. If your mesh is going to be animating or deforming, you want to make sure that tangency is checked. That's going to allow your normals to follow the animated character really nicely. Otherwise, you're going to create a world normal map, and those are used typically for characters that are stationary and do not move. And you'll want to set this to subdivision level 1 as well, so it creates the difference between the highest and the lowest subdivision level. And that's pretty much it for your settings. With all of those set, we can go ahead and create all maps, and we can go ahead and give the maps a name. I'm going to go ahead and call them landscape, and I'm going to go ahead and save it in the ZBrush folder, or I guess I could save it in the texture folder. Sometimes I typically like to save those out into a separate folder just to be able to manipulate them a little bit easier. But in our particular case, we don't have very many textures in our texture folder anyway, so we'll go ahead and save there. And it's going to go ahead and run through and process these files. So I will meet you guys on the other side once it is done projecting and processing out all of our normal maps and displacement maps. Alrighty, and the export finished. And depending upon your subdivision level, depending upon the speed of your computer, and all that kind of good stuff, it could take anywhere between like 5 minutes to an hour, depending upon how many tiles you have and all that. But they're all baked, and what we want to do now is, I can see that they've got some really odd naming to them. And I also don't like the fact that my UDIM doesn't have a underscore in the front of it. So what we can do is we can go to texture folder, right click, and browse and bridge. We can go ahead and use our renaming tools to correct some of these deficiencies here. You can also kind of sort of see in detail what our maps look like, which is really great. But anyway, let's do Control-Shift-R. Let's go ahead and get rid of this Landscape 01 deal that this has got going on. And let's rename all those. Alright. And then let's come in again. Let's do Control-Shift-R, and this time I'm going to take Displacement, and I'm going to replace it with Displacement underscore. Okay, and I'll take care of all the displacement ones, and then I need to do the normals as well. So Control-Shift-R. Let's take norm and replace it with norm underscore. And there we go. Now all our textures are nice and clean. And what we do is come here into Cinema, and we can get rid of this default material that I believe Arnold or Maya shacked us up with. Or maybe ZBrush did. Let's go ahead and create a new Arnold surface shader, our standard shader here. And let's place it in the scene materials so it's nice and organized. We can rename this to Landscape Material. Unlock our Attributes Manager, and we go into the Network Editor. Now in here, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to plug something into the displacement, and we're also going to want to plug our normals into the beauty. Now for normal maps, what you need to do is you need to drag in a normal node or normal map node. By the by, in C4D2A, you can also type in the names of your shaders here if you don't know where the shaders are exactly located. And we're going to need a normal map, and we're going to need a normal displacement. Now, under the displacement shader category here, you have vector displacement as well, which displaces using a normal and using a displacement as well. So it's kind of like a colored displacement map, and it'll actually displace in a direction, which allows you to get some really interesting detail. But for us, we're just using a normal, old, everyday displacement map. So the displacement map gets the displacement normal, or the normal displacement node rather, I should say, gets plugged into the Arnold displacement, and it will displace the geometry. The normal map gets plugged into the beauty port. The standard shader, which will be our color, which we'll be discussing in the next tutorial, that gets plugged into, of course, our shader port. So it's quite similar to our bump map node. The normal map itself will get plugged into the normal map port of the normal map node. So another way we can bring an image in, which I don't regularly use anymore. I used to use a few versions back in the beta, but you could just bring in an image node here and actually plug it into your normal map. And that's another way you can bring in images. And images are located under the texture tree here. And then you could, of course, click on the dots and go ahead and grab your image if you wanted to go about it that way. But of course, I like to drag my images in. And I could just drag the image directly here into the image name and grab the image that way, and you'll see that your shader preview changed there. Alright, for the normal displacement, we're going to drag in one of our displacement images, and we're going to go ahead and plug that into the displacement, and now that image will drive our displacement. Our scale would be whatever our scale was set to in ZBrush. Because we go Z'd from Cinema into ZBrush and then back, our scale should match ZBrush's scale, and so we should be able to get our detail without manipulating this. If you find that your detail is messed up, or if you're dealing with somebody who, like in a production I'm working on, I'm dealing with a guy in Poland and he doesn't have Cinema 4D, and he's just building the models directly in ZBrush, or he's building them off of a model that's somewhere else and kind of sort of detailing them. Those models aren't going to be to scale, so when he sends me displacement maps for the character doesn't look exactly as he actually modeled in ZBrush, and I have to finagle with the scale here in Arnold to get the look that he actually produced. So if you can, make sure that your models scales, and make sure the scales between all of the programs that you're using all kind of match up, so that you don't have to worry about weird displacement issues. But alright, so this is all set up. The only thing we want to do now is just use our UDIM workflow once again to go ahead and make sure that all 18 tiles will be loaded by this shader network, no matter where we're looking at on the landscape. So all we have to do is just replace the number here with our UDIM token, and we'll be able to load all of those tiles up in one fell swoop. Alright, so if we save and then we hit play on our IPR, this should render, and it should give us quite a bit of detail. Excellent. So our normal map should be giving us quite a bit of detail here. Now, let's look into our displacement workflow. So in Arnold, in order to get displacement on your mesh, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to plug in a Arnold parameters tag. Now this tag, we discussed it a little bit before when we were making our models opaque or non-opaque so that we could add refraction transparency to them. But this tag can actually be connected to any standard C4D object. So if you were to connect it to a standard light, let's say you have a scene that you've already been working on in Cinema and you just want to convert it to Arnold, but you don't necessarily want to delete all your lights and use new Arnold lights or whatever, you could create a light and you could plug a Arnold parameters tag on there. And now the Arnold parameters tag is very smart. It's found out that you're using a light here and it's giving you access to Arnold controls for that light. And so now you can actually manipulate that light using Arnold, which is really great. You can increase the light's exposure. Vice versa, this tag will work with a lot of, or almost any Arnold or any Cinema 4D object. So you plug it on something like a X particles emitter, all of a sudden it will expose particle parameters for you. If you plug it onto a volumetric object like Turbulence FD, it will expose volumetric properties for you to manipulate. So it's a very powerful tag. On a polygon object like this, it's going to expose some polygon capabilities, including subdivision and displacement. Now, your subdivisions are going to, the iterations is going to match what you had in ZBrush. So if in ZBrush you had a subdivision level of 6, then right now, in order for Arnold to be able to get all the detail in your displacement map that you had in ZBrush, you need a subdivision level of about 6 to divide this mesh at render time to get that level of detail so that Arnold can put those crazy noises in there. But because we have a normal map and the normal map is providing the detail for our mesh, we could put in a number of about half of the iterations, and thus what will happen is the displacement will give us a better profile in silhouette when we look at our mesh up close, and it'll give us the illusion, or not really the illusion, it'll give us kind of the reality that our mesh actually really does have that kind of level of detail. But it'll also save us on render time as well, because we're not subdividing the mesh into the millions of polygons. And what we want to do for our type is we want to use Cat Clark, which is similar to the subdivision method that ZBrush uses, and also it's the default method that a lot of other 3D programs use, Maya and Cinema included. Alright, and so with Cat Clark set up and iteration set to 3, we're getting quite a few polygons here. And then on our landscape itself, we're also going to want, of course, add our material, and that is going to give us all of that detail. And so there we go. All of that detail made it in quite nicely. And the export didn't take entirely too long, maybe about 5-6 seconds. And that's mainly because in our Arnold parameter settings, once again, our iterations aren't set extremely high. At about 6 iterations, I've found that this takes about 10-15 seconds to actually export, with Arnold chugging back there trying to subdivide this to 10 million polygons at render time. Mind you, once you get the scene cached, once that 10 million polygons is cached in Arnold's scene memory, you get this relatively real-time feedback in the IPR, which is really great. So once again, Arnold is incredible at handling lots and lots and lots of polygons. Once the export is finally finished, your ability to move around the IPR is astounding. So we've got these weird tracks here, and if we were to go into ZBrush and kind of sort of look around here, we're seeing that our detail isn't quite exactly the same as it was in Cinema, or rather Cinema's is not exactly the same as it was in ZBrush. And that's probably partly due to some of the height settings in Arnold. So if we come back to Arnold, under our Arnold parameters tag here, we have displacement, and we have the height option here. And this height underneath the Arnold parameters controls exactly how high the displacement is actually in the polygons, so to speak, or into the object. So if we were to bring this down to something like 1 or like 0.5, then we're telling it to go 0.5 centimeters up or down in the displacement of the displacement map. And so with a value of that, we're going to get a much smoother displacement here, and we won't get so much of that stair stepping that we were getting there. And that's probably more accurate to what we want, potentially. See if we go back into ZBrush and we come over here. And kind of look at some of this detail here. Let's see. So yeah, there is a little bit of stair stepping there going in the scene. So even the ZBrush scene definitely has some of that. I feel like it may just maybe be reversed a little bit as far as whether it's high or low. And for that, I would play with the normal map. Play with flipping the R's and the G's and see if you get a look that's more what you would like as far as it being engraved or non-engraved. I think it probably is okay though in this particular case. Still really hard to tell, but that's that. That pretty much allows you to do your displacement. So it's a pretty simple network for the most part. Nothing too complicated about it. And we already used this one network to actually wire up 18 textures. Whereas in something like Cinema, that might be a little bit more difficult. We might have to use a single shader for each single texture. So alrighty guys, in the next one I'd like to go into Mudbox and show you guys how you can paint. Mudbox has a much more concise painting tool set than ZBrush does, and it's on par, I feel like, with the tool set that Mari has. Although Mari is probably a top tier app, it's just I can't use it on my computer unfortunately, so I haven't really been able to see how really amazing it is. But Mudbox has an incredible workflow, quite similar to Photoshop, and some really nice brushes, and it's just really stellar for what it is. So I'll see you guys in the next one.